Hey everyone, was this a scam?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rena Ninen. You're looking at live pictures out of Charlottesville, Virginia. This is where violent clashes have broken out between white nationalists and counter protests there.
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and that was news footage from the infamous Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. Got a lot of attention at the time, still looms very large in progressive minds, and is worth revisiting because we just got this extraordinary indictment from the Department of Justice of the Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the most noxious groups in America, devoted, of course, to deeming any person or any group it disagrees with a hate group and trying to get them shunned from polite society, defunded, etc. But according to the DOJ, it's even worse than that. The Southern Poverty Law Center has been engaged in funding organizers and leaders of the hate groups that it's devoted to fighting, including in one case, someone involved in Unite the Right. So let's take a look at this real quick. So the indictment says that starting in the 1980s, the SPLC began operating a covert network of informants. These people were referred to as field sources, or the Fs. That's relevant because of the designation of this guy we're just about to get to. He was called F-37. He was a member of the online leadership chat group that planned the 2017 Unite the Right event in Charlottesville, Virginia, and attended the event at the direction of the SPLC. F-37 made racist postings under the supervision of the SPLC and helped contribute transportation to the event for several attendees. To underline the point, the Southern Poverty Law Center was funding an organizer of a racist event that was played up as one of the foremost national traumas in America over the last decade. And the suggestion is that the SPLC funded figures like this and organizations like this in order to be able to turn around and say, look, what a terrible racism problem we have in this country. Give us more resources so we can fight it. Now, the SPLC says in its defense, no, we're just funding informants so we can know what's happening with these organizations, so we can monitor them and check them and fight them. But this guy with the Unite the Right. He wasn't just a friend of a friend who was hearing about what was going on. He was help making it happen. He was getting people to the event. He was planning it. He was posting racist things online, and just objectively and morally funding someone doing that is a terrible thing, and on the face of it is perverse and corrupt given the stated mission of the SPLC. It'd be a little bit like the NRA for some reason funding pro-gun control members of Congress, or pro-lifers. They would never do this. Opening abortion clinics so they can turn around and say, look what a horror abortion is. And these kind of guys that are engaged in this kind of activity, members of the Klan or random racists online, they're not Jeff Bezos, right? Don't have huge sources of alternative income coming in. So any amount of money the SPLC is giving them potentially keeps them in the racist game. And the list of figures that were bankrolled by the SPLC is really incredible. Take a look at the indictment again. We have so-called F Unknown, who's the imperial wizard of the United Clans of America. We've got F42, the former chairman of the neo-Nazi National Alliance. Then we get F30, who led the National Socialist Party of America and was a former director of a faction of the Aryan nations. And we get F43, the reported national president of American Front. Now that suggests these were really consequential figures in these organizations. I don't know much about clan hierarchy, but Imperial Wizard sounds like a pretty important title. Certainly titles like chairman, president, director suggest these were leading figures in these organizations, not just random foot soldiers who might hear some scuttlebutt and pass it along to the SPLSC. And we are talking in some of these cases about real, no kidding money. So check this out. F9 was someone affiliated with the aforementioned National Alliance, did fundraising for them. And according to the indictment, between 14 and 23, the SPLC paid this person secretly more than $1 million. Then we get this figure F27, reported as an officer in the National Socialist Movement and the Aryan Nations affiliated Sadistic Souls Motorcycle Club. No thanks. According to the indictment, between 14 and 20, the SPLC secretly paid this person more than $300,000. So that's real money, right? That can make racist work lucrative if someone is funneling those kind of dollars to you. Worse, some of these guys, the SPLC would turn around and feature them as hate figures in their materials. The former chairman of the National Alliance got $140,000 during the same time period in which he was featured, or she, I guess, was featured on the SPLC's extremist file webpage. F-30, who led the National Socialist Party of America, he got $70,000 at the same time he was featured, or she again, I guess, was featured on the SPLC's extremist file webpage. The union was that they pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. Well, here, these weren't pretend racist, I assume, but the SPLC was paying them in order to oppose them. And by the way, let's get back to Charlottesville. So what happened after Charlottesville? I will argue this is an event that was exaggerated, involved a couple hundred people, shouldn't have happened, terrible. But it is true that someone was killed. People were hurt. There were real, no kidding fights in the streets. So did the SPLC conclude after that, we can't have anything to do with anyone associated in any manner with this atrocity? No, they kept paying that organizer for years afterwards. Let's go back to the indictment. Reminder, F-37 is the guy who was involved in planning Unite the Right. Again, that event happened in 2017. But according to the indictment, between 2015 and 2023, 6 long years later, the SPLC secretly paid F-37 more than $270,000. Now, Charlottesville was quite bad, never should have happened, but another day and age, this might have been a local story or a state story. It was spun up into a national event in part to indict the right, as supposedly a bunch of racists, and to hurt Donald Trump politically. And from that time, we had this rancid lie entering the national consciousness, still hasn't gone away, that Donald Trump somehow called neo-Nazis very fine people after that day, and he just didn't. He didn't. So here's a transcript, and Trump did say among the demonstrators and counter-demonstrators, you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. But then he goes on several sentences later to say, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists because they should be condemned totally. Then we get layered on top of Charlottesville and on top of Trump's alleged reaction to it, Joe Biden's presidential run. He made the case absurdly, this guy has wanted to be president his entire adult life, that he was running for president because of those things.
Charlottesville is also home to a defining moment for this nation in the last few years. It was there on August of 2017 we saw Klansmen and white supremacists and neo-Nazis come out in the open. Their crazed faces, illuminated by torches, veins bulging and bearing the fangs of racism, chanting the same anti-Semitic bile heard across Europe in the 30s.
So is Charlottesville a scam? No, there were real racists there. It was a real event. Terrible day. Never should have happened. But we had this vast edifice of meaning piled on top, this really small foundation of what really happened there. And now we know that the Southern Poverty Law Center was part of that foundation, an organization devoted supposedly to stopping things like that from happening, instead played, at least at the margins, a role in helping make it happen. And that's a disgrace. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.